I never thought that at 44, I would be sitting in my garage late at night, hiding from my own wife. The metallic smell of grease and gasoline, an old leather couch in the corner, and a few cans of beer in the small refrigerator were my refuge. Meredith hated this garage. Maybe that's why I started spending more and more time here. The compressor hummed quietly, and by the light of the single lamp, I fiddled with the carburetor of a client's '67 Mustang. Work always helped me think, and there was a lot to think about, especially after tonight. It all started at dinner. Our oldest, Ethan, had been at baseball practice all day and was excited about the upcoming game. The twins, Abigail and Olivia, talked excitedly about a school science project. Just a normal family night. At least it seemed that way for the first 10 minutes. "Dad, Coach said I can be a pitcher in the next game!" Ethan glowed with pride, waving a fork with a slice of potato on it. "That's great, son. I'll be sure to come watch on Saturday." I smiled, really proud of his accomplishment. "Unless, of course, you're busy in your precious workshop." Meredith's voice sounded like a whiplash. "Or not going fishing with that. What's his name? Reed." I felt the muscles in my jaw tense. Reed had been my best friend since high school. He'd helped me open a workshop when everyone around me thought the idea was crazy. Meredith included. "I told you I'd be there." My voice sounded calm, even though I was seething inside. "And this has nothing to do with Reed." The twins looked at each other. In their 8 years, they'd learned to sense a storm coming. Ethan ducked into his plate, carefully avoiding looking at us. Sure. Meredith pursed her lips, slicing the chicken into small, perfectly even pieces. "Like that time at Abigail's Christmas concert? You promised to come too." "Mom, but Dad sent Uncle Vince to make a video," Abigail put in quietly. "And then we watched it together." "Honey, adults are talking." Meredith cut her off. I saw my daughter cringe, and it pissed me off even more. I had an urgent client, a sports coupe that needed to be prepped for a race the next day. "I told you." I tried to speak evenly, though every word came hard. "Oh yes, your precious customers." Meredith set the instruments aside. "There's always some broken-down car more important than family, isn't there, Garrett?" "Those broken cars feed our family." I put my fork away too. My appetite was completely gone. "Can I go to my room? I need to finish my homework." Ethan hurriedly got up from the table. "So do we!" the twins chorused. Meredith waved her hand, giving permission. The kids disappeared at the speed of light, leaving us alone in the sepulchral silence of the dining room. I stared at my wife and tried to remember when it all went wrong. When had her smile, the one I had fallen in love with 15 years ago, turned into this hard line? When did caring become a noose around my neck? "Do you know what Mrs. Pearson said last week?" Meredith began picking up plates, stacking them on top of each other with excessive force. That her husband started out with work delays too, and then it turned out he was having an affair with his secretary. "I don't even have a secretary." I rubbed the bridge of my nose tiredly. "And you know that very well." "But there is this new client. What's her name? The one who comes in a red Corvette?" "A Mrs. Blackwood? She's 65 years old, Meredith." "Oh, so you even remember her name?" She smiled victoriously, as if she'd caught me doing something. I silently stood up from the table. It was useless to argue. Any word I said, she could turn it inside out. Years of practice. "Where are you going?" A metallic note appeared in her voice. "To the garage. Gotta finish work on the Mustang." "Sure, run. That's all you know how to do. Run away from trouble." I didn't answer. I just walked out, carefully closing the door behind me. There was music playing upstairs. I think it was from Ethan's room. The twins were whispering about something in their room. Just an ordinary evening at the Holbrook house. Now, sitting in the garage looking at the disassembled carburetor, I thought about how we'd gotten to this point. Meredith and I had once dreamed of a home of our own, of children, of a future. I built my business from the ground up, working 16 hours a day. We bought this house in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, had 3 wonderful children. You'd think we'd be happy. My phone vibrated. A message from Reed. "How about a beer tomorrow? Vince promised a new craft one." I smiled. Good old Reed. He always sensed when I needed to talk. Vince's bar had become something of a confessional for us over the years. It was there 3 months ago that I'd first said out loud what I'd been afraid to even think. I think my marriage is falling apart. Tomorrow at 8, I texted back and went back to the carburetor. At least the irons don't reproach you for working too hard. They're just waiting for you to find and fix the problem. If only life were as simple as that. Vince's bar was half empty when I walked in. Tuesday wasn't the busiest day of the week. The old wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, and the vintage jukebox in the corner played Hotel California softly. Reed was already waiting at our usual table by the window, 2 bottles of local beer in front of him. "You look bad." He handed me one of the bottles. In the dim light, I noticed new gray strands in his dark hair. Time spared none of us. "Thanks for the compliment." I took a sip. The beer was good. Vince always knew how to pick the right kind. "How's Sarah doing?" "Pregnant. Twins." Reed grinned, but there was worry in his eyes. "Looks like I'll have to expand the house soon." "Congratulations, old man." I smiled genuinely. After 10 years of marriage, he and Sarah had finally decided to have kids. "So, are you going to ask me for a discount on the family minivan?" "You wish," he snorted, but immediately became serious. "How's home?" I sighed, twirling the bottle in my hands. On the label, some local artist had painted the mountains of Utah in the sunset light. It was beautiful, peaceful. It was nothing like what was going on in my life. "Remember the first time I met Meredith? At that cafe on Main Street?" Reed nodded. He was working as an associate at a law firm at the time, and I was just out of auto mechanic college. Meredith was a waitress, moonlighting between art school classes. Her red hair was gathered up and there was a coffee stain on her apron. She spilled a whole tray of drinks on me. I smiled at the memory. And then she insisted on washing my shirt herself. Said she knew a secret way to get stains out. "And you fell in love like a boy." Reed sipped his beer. "Honestly, I thought it wouldn't last long. You were changing girls like a glove back then. You know what got me about her? She could dream. We could talk for hours about the future, how I'd open my own studio and she'd paint, how we'd buy a house, have kids." "What happened to her painting?" I shrugged. "She gave it up after Ethan was born. Said a real mother should devote all her time to her family. I tried to convince her to go back to her hobby, even set her up with a studio in the basement. You know what's down there now? Storage for canned goods and old stuff." The bar got a little busier. A bunch of young guys came in, apparently after work. Their laughter and jokes reminded me of what I was like when I was their age. Carefree. Confident that everything was going to be okay. "She made a scene yesterday over Abigail's Christmas concert." I rubbed my face with my hands. "The one from 4 months ago." "The one you missed because of emergency repairs?" "Yes. The client was getting ready to race. The car was his only chance. I sent Vince to take a video. We watched it with the whole family afterward. Abigail didn't even seem to take offense. And Meredith, she just can't let go." Vince, as if he'd heard us talking about him, approached the table. His massive figure cast a shadow across the table. "Another round?" He took the empty bottles. "On the house. You look like you could use one." I nodded gratefully. Vince was a good friend, the kind of guy who knew when to speak up and when to just silently pour a drink. "The kids are starting to notice it. Ethan hid in his room yesterday as soon as our conversation started. And the twins? They're always so quiet at dinner now. Afraid to say the wrong thing. Maybe we should think about family therapy," Reed suggested cautiously. I grinned bitterly. Tried suggesting it. She said I wanted to make her look crazy in front of a stranger. Vince brought out new bottles, some kind of dark stout this time. It was starting to get dark outside, and the reflection of the bar's neon sign played colorful highlights on the condensation wet glass. "Do you remember when we celebrated the opening of the workshop?" Reed was clearly trying to change the subject. "Meredith made that huge wrench-shaped cake back then." "Yeah," I smiled. "She was up all night with the mastic. Wanted it to be perfect. And she was so damn proud of you." "She was," I echoed. "You know, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and hear her crying in the bathroom, quietly thinking I can't hear. And then in the morning she pretends everything's fine. Makes breakfast, gets the kids ready for school. Only her eyes are red." Reed was silent, giving me a chance to talk. At a neighboring table, a young couple was arguing about something in a whisper. The girl was twirling her ring nervously on her finger, just like Meredith does when she's nervous. I found a box of old photos in the closet this morning. I took a sip of beer. Was looking for car papers and I came across these. Our wedding, our honeymoon in Vegas, Ethan's first ultrasound. We were so happy, Reed. What happened to those people in the pictures? Life happened. He shrugged. Look, maybe you just need some time. Take a vacation, go somewhere for the two of you. That's the thing. I was suggesting it. For our anniversary, I wanted to surprise her by booking the same hotel in Vegas where we stayed on our honeymoon. You know what she said? That I was irresponsible, that I shouldn't leave the kids, that the money would be better spent on a new washing machine. The jukebox switched to something from Bruce Springsteen. I remembered Meredith and I dancing to that song at our wedding. She'd stepped on my foot then and laughed so embarrassed. And last night, after that scandal at dinner, I heard her on the phone with her mother, saying that I was getting distant, that I must have someone else. That's bullshit, and you know it. Reed set the bottle on the table with such force that the beer nearly spilled out. I know, but it's like she's looking for confirmation of her fears everywhere. And every time I'm late, every missed call. Remember Mrs. Blackwood, my client with the Corvette? Reed nodded. So Meredith is dead serious that I'm having an affair with her. With a 65-year-old widow who comes in once a month for an oil change. That's paranoid. Reed shook his head. That's what I'm saying. And you know what the worst part is? I'm getting used to it. The constant suspicions, the scandals out of nothing, the way she uses the kids. I paused, catching myself in a thought I'd been chasing away for a long time. Using the children? I was silent for a long time, gathering my thoughts. A fire truck drove by outside my window, its siren drowning out the music and conversation for a moment. She started saying things to them, implying that Daddy doesn't love them since he works so hard, that they were lucky to have at least one caring parent. And last week I overheard her telling Ethan that if it weren't for the kids, I'd have left them a long time ago. Damn! Reed leaned back in his chair. This is getting serious, Garrett. I know. I finished my beer in one gulp. I really loved her once. Sometimes I think I still do. But I can't live like this anymore, Reed. I just can't. The bar had gone completely dark, with only the lamps above the bar casting a warm glow on the bottles. I looked at my watch, almost 10. I'd probably have another scandal waiting for me at home for coming home late. Maybe you should... Reed hesitated. Think about getting a divorce. The word hung between us, heavy and frightening. I'd never said it out loud, though it had been popping into my thoughts more and more often in recent months. And the children? I shook my head. What will happen to them? Sometimes it's better for children to have two happy parents separately than two unhappy ones together, Reed said carefully, weighing each word. I knew he was right. Somewhere deep inside, I'd known that for a long time. But the mere thought of not seeing Abigail reading her favorite books every day, of Olivia telling another school story, of Ethan practicing with a baseball bat in the backyard. I gotta go. I stood up, pulling out my wallet. Gotta get up early tomorrow. I'm serious, Garrett. Reed put a hand on my shoulder. Think about it, and know that whatever you decide, I'm on your side. On the drive home, I thought about that conversation, about the word divorce, which now seemed to throb in my temples in time with the motion of the windshield wipers. It began to rain, a fine, nasty rain, as if nature had decided to add drama to my thoughts. Parking in front of the house, I sat in the car for a long time, staring out the lighted windows. The light was still on in the twins' room, probably reading before bed. All the lights on the first floor were on too. Meredith wouldn't go to bed until I got back. Not out of concern, but out of a desire to supervise. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, preparing for another round of what our family life had become. Maybe Reed was right. Maybe it's time to face the obvious. But first we need to get through another night. Weekends have always been the hardest time. On weekdays, work saved me from endless nagging and scandals, but Saturdays and Sundays turned into a real ordeal. Especially this morning. the first morning after my conversation with Reed at the bar. I woke up early, as usual, an old mechanic's habit. My body was up by itself at 6 in the morning, even on weekends. Meredith was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed. In her sleep, she looked almost like her old self, the girl I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Only the wrinkle between her eyebrows was still there, like she was worried about something even in her sleep. I tiptoed down to the kitchen, trying not to squeak on the steps. I turned on the coffee maker, the old Italian machine I'd repaired last summer. Meredith had said then that it would be easier to buy a new one, but I loved fixing broken things. Maybe that's why it took me so long to try to glue our marriage back together. As the coffee dripped slowly into my cup, filling the kitchen with a familiar aroma, I looked through the mail on my phone. A letter from a parts supplier, a mailing from the local baseball club where Ethan coaches, and a notice from the bank about a large withdrawal from our joint account. Yesterday, there had been enough to pay for a new shipment of parts, and now the account was almost empty. I checked the statement. The money was withdrawn in cash from an ATM near our house. Meredith. But why? "Good morning, Dad." Olivia's voice made me wince. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her favorite pajamas, her hair mussed after a nap. "Good morning, Princess." I tried to smile, putting my phone away. "You're early. We have a swim tournament today, remember?" She slid into a high chair by the kitchen counter. "Mom said you were taking Abby and me." Damn. Right. I'd completely forgotten about the competition. "Of course I will." I pulled out a second cup and poured milk into it. Olivia didn't like coffee, but she liked to play grown-up by pretending to drink it with me. "Where's your sister?" "Packing a bag. She's worried." Olivia lowered her voice to a whisper. "You know, she's afraid of losing. Says Mom will be upset." Something clenched in my chest. Meredith had always been ambitious, but lately her drive for perfection had become almost painful, especially when it came to children. "Dad?" Olivia twirled the cup in her hands. "How come you and Mom don't watch movies together in the evenings anymore?" I froze. Kids always notice more than we realize. "It's just, we have a lot to do," I answered awkwardly. "Adult stuff." "Why are you sleeping in the garage now?" I saw." She looked at me with her serious green eyes, just like mine. "The day before yesterday, when I went down to get a drink of water, you were lying on the couch in the garage." Thankfully, I was saved from having to answer by Abigail's appearance. She walked into the kitchen, already fully dressed in a tracksuit, carrying a large bag over her shoulder. "Good morning," she said quietly, climbing into the chair next to her sister. "How did you sleep, champ?" I ruffled her hair, but she shied away from the touch. Another worrying sign. She used to love it when I did that. "It's fine." She pulled a bottle of water out of her bag. "Mom said if I don't take the gold, I've wasted my training time." I gritted my teeth. "We'll talk to Meredith about it." We would definitely talk about it. "Abby, listen." I squatted down in front of her, looking into her eyes. "What matters is the enjoyment of the swim, not the medals." "But Mom says—" "Girls, get in the car. We have to go," came Meredith's cold voice from the doorway. She stood there, already dressed and wearing makeup despite the early hour. "But Daddy promised to drive us," Olivia protested. "Daddy has to work," Meredith retorted. "Don't you, honey? You always have more important things to do than family." The twins looked at each other and slid silently out of their chairs. I watched them walk toward the exit, two small figures with slumped shoulders. "We need to talk," I said as they walked out. "About what?" "About how you emptied our account." Meredith crossed her arms over her chest. "What? You're the one who withdrew the money last night." "Oh, so you're watching my spending? Controlling my every move?" "Meredith, it's money for parts. Without them, the workshop—" "I don't care about your workshop." She raised her voice. "I spent it on the kids, for their future. Someone has to think about it." "What are you talking about? What future?" "I opened separate accounts for them, for college, because clearly you're not the one who's going to take care of it." I looked at her and didn't recognize her. Where had gone that cheerful girl who said money was just paper, and the important thing was to be happy? We were supposed to discuss this together, I tried to speak calmly. It's our common money, our common children. Shared? She laughed bitterly. When was the last time you helped Ethan with his homework? When you went to parent-teacher conferences, when… Mom, we're late! Olivia's shout from outside interrupted her tirade. We're not done yet. Meredith turned to leave. And yes, don't expect us early. I'm taking the girls to my mother's after the competition. I was alone in the kitchen. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, never drunk. There was that peculiar silence in the house that only happens after the kids are gone. Oppressive. Wrong. The phone vibrated, a message from Reed. How are you? Have you thought about our conversation? I stared at the screen without answering. Then I slowly made my way upstairs to Meredith's and my bedroom. I opened the closet where the important documents were kept. Among the insurance policies and contracts, I found a folder with our marriage certificate. 15 years ago, that piece of paper had seemed like the beginning of something beautiful. The clock ticked in the hallway, an old wall clock from Meredith's grandmother. The ticking had once been soothing, but now it was a reminder that time was passing, life was passing, and I was stuck in this nightmare. Pulling out my phone, I dialed Reed's number. Are you at the office? I asked when he answered. Yeah, sorting out some paperwork. Is something wrong? I need a consultation, professional. A pause on the other end of the wire. Are you sure? I looked at the picture on my bedside table, Meredith and I on our wedding day. Happy, in love, confident about the future. Yes, I said firmly. I want to file for divorce. Come back in an hour. There was no surprise in Reed's voice, only understanding. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside the window, a new day was beginning. The sun was slowly rising over the mountains, coloring the sky pink. Somewhere out there in the pool, my daughters are getting ready to compete. Ethan is probably still asleep. He likes to snuggle in bed on the weekends. I pulled an old suitcase out from under the bed, the same one we went on our wedding trip with. Slowly, I began to put things away. Just the essentials. A few shirts, jeans, underwear, shaving supplies from the bathroom. In a dresser drawer, I found an old picture of the kids, all three of them at last year's picnic, laughing, covered in ice cream. I put it in my wallet. Then I went down to the garage, got the spare key to the workshop. There's a little rec room in there. Couch, microwave, shower, temporary shelter until I can find something more permanent. I left a note on the kitchen table. I'll be late. Short, no explanation. Explanation will come later when I have a better idea of what I'm going to do. After I talk to Reed, I'll deal with the legal side of things. I got in the car, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of our bedroom window, the place where our life together had begun 15 years ago. The phone vibrated again. A message from Meredith. Abigail took silver. I hope you're pleased. Your absence clearly affected her score. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I dialed Abigail's number. She had her own emergency phone. Dad? Her voice sounded quiet, but I could hear a note of pride in it. Hey, champ, I heard the news. You did great. Really? But it's only silver. That's great. I'm so proud of you. Tell Olivia we'll celebrate tonight, okay? I'll bring your favorite pizza. With pineapple? There was a perkiness in her voice. With pineapple, I confirmed, smiling. Love you. Love you too, Dad. I hung up the phone and pulled into the driveway. A long day and an even longer conversation with Reed lay ahead. Reed's office was in an old brick building in downtown Salt Lake City. I'd been here dozens of times, discussing paperwork for the workshop, having coffee with a friend on my lunch break. But today was different. Today I came in as a customer. Have a seat. Reed pointed to the leather chair across from his desk. An impressive stack of documents lay on the dark wood tabletop. I've prepared the preliminary papers. I sat down, feeling uncomfortable in my work clothes amidst all the office glitz. An expensive clock ticked on the wall, not at all like ours back home. Their sound was softer, more confident. Before we get started, Reed took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Are you sure about this? I nodded, pulling out my phone. I opened the latest text from Meredith and held it out to my friend. Abigail embarrassed me in front of everyone. Silver, it's all your influence, teaching kids to be mediocre. Reed whistled. And this is because of second place in the kids' competition? Now do you understand? I put the phone away. She's suffocating them with her ambition. I can't watch this anymore. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the legal intricacies of divorce. Reed talked about property division, child custody, alimony. I nodded and signed some preliminary forms, but my thoughts were far away, at home with the kids. Garrett? Reed's voice brought me back to reality. Did you hear what I said? About temporary residency? What? Oh, yeah. I'm moving into the workshop. There's a restroom there. No, Reed shook his head. That's not a good idea. You need to stay home. But, look, if you move out now, before the court officially rules, it could be used against you, like you abandoned your family. I sighed. The prospect of staying under the same roof as Meredith seemed unbearable. How long will it take? A few months at least, and Garrett, be prepared for her not to take it lightly. As if to confirm his words, the phone trilled. Meredith? I hesitated for a second before answering it. Where are you? Her voice sounded deceptively calm. On business. On business? On a Saturday? And what business is so important? I looked at Reed. He nodded. Sooner or later, it would have to be said anyway. I'm at Reed's, in the office. A pause. A long, heavy one. Oh, yeah. The familiar hysterical notes came into her voice. And what are you doing in a lawyer's office on your day off? Meredith. You wouldn't dare, would you? She interrupted me. Just try it, Garrett. Just try to do this to us. We need to talk, calmly. No yelling. Oh, now you want to talk? After sneaking off to the lawyer's office? I'll be home in an hour. We'll discuss everything. Don't bother. Her voice turned icy. The kids and I are going to my mom's. And don't you dare call Abigail. I took her phone. She doesn't deserve it after today's embarrassment. You can't just take the kids away like that. No? Well, you try and stop me. Tell the judge what a great father you are. Always missing work, drinking with your friends. I haven't had a drink in 3 years, you know that. Really? What did you smell like last night? And the night before that? I have witnesses, Garrett. Neighbors who saw you coming home drunk? Parents from school who noticed the smell of alcohol at the last assembly? That's a lie. Prove it, she grinned. Good luck trying to explain to a judge why an exemplary mother of 3 is lying about her alcoholic husband. The call cut off. I sat up, clutching the phone. She's bluffing. Reed put a hand on my shoulder. We'll gather evidence that you don't drink. Security footage from Vince's bar, statements from friends. That's not the point. I shook my head. She's taking the kids, right now. She can't. But I'd already jumped up, grabbing my jacket. Only one thought pounded in my head. Make it home in time. Get home before she took them away. The drive, which usually took 20 minutes, seemed endless. At every stoplight, I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, counting the seconds. I called home and there was no answer. No one answered my messages. As I pulled up to the house, I realized I was late. Meredith's car wasn't in the driveway. I rushed inside, and the house was dead silent. On the kitchen table lay a note, Meredith's handwriting, sharp and abrupt. Don't come looking for us. I will protect the children from your selfishness. If you try anything, everyone will know what kind of father you really are. The twins' room was a shambles, as if things had been packed in a hurry. Olivia's favorite plush unicorn was lying on the floor. She would never part with it willingly. On Ethan's desk was an incomplete math homework assignment. In the bathroom, damp towels from the pool. I sank down onto the living room couch, feeling the ground go from under my feet. A family photo was staring at me from the wall. Last year's hike in the mountains. We're all smiling, happy, carefree. Ethan is holding his first trophy he caught, a small trout. The twins are in matching hiking outfits. Meredith. The phone vibrates. A message from an unfamiliar number. Dad, it's me, Ethan. I'm writing from Grandma's phone. Mom said you don't want to live with us anymore. Is that true? I reread the message a few times, trying to deal with the trembling in my hands. What had she told them? How do you explain to a 13-year-old boy that his mother is using him as a weapon? No, son, it's not true. I love you more than anything in the world. Then why do you want to leave us? I don't want to leave you, not ever. Mom and I, we have complications, adult complications, but it has nothing to do with you. Mom's crying. Abby's crying too. Olivia's asking when we're coming home. I closed my eyes. It's going to be okay, I promise. Tell your sisters I love them. Love you too. I have to go. Mom's coming. The messages stopped. I sat in the empty house, listening to the clock ticking on the wall. Each beat echoed in my temples like an accusation. Tick-tock. You're late. Tick-tock. You lost them. The phone rang. Reed. She took them away, I said, without waiting for a question. I'm already calling the judge. This is child abduction, Garrett. She can't just... She can, I interrupted him. You don't know Meredith. She's been preparing for this for years. Gathered evidence against me. Built the image of the perfect mother. We'll get through this. You have rights. Rights? I grinned bitterly. What rights does an alcoholic father who disappears on the job have? She's thought this through, Reed. She thought it all out pretty damn well. A heavy silence hung in the receiver. Come to my place, Reed finally said. You can't be alone like this. No, I have to be here, in case they come back. Garrett, I'll call you later. I hung up and went upstairs to the kids' rooms. Ethan's room smelled like sports uniforms and new comic books. On the wall was a poster of his favorite baseball team. In the closet, neatly folded Sunday school uniforms. In the twins' room, 2 identical desks piled with school supplies. An unread book on Abigail's bed. Olivia's drawing album, open to a sketch of our family 5 smiling figures holding hands. I sat on the edge of Olivia's bed, picking up the abandoned unicorn. There was stuffing sticking out of its worn side. I was going to fix it this weekend. I'll get you back, I whispered into the emptiness of the room. Whatever it takes. Sunday morning greeted me with the humming silence of an empty house. I'd spent the night in the garage, unable to be in the bedroom, where every little thing reminded me of Meredith, or near the kids' rooms, where the emptiness felt especially acute. The old leather couch that had once seemed comfortable enough for an evening's rest had become an instrument of torture overnight. My back was aching and my temples were pounding. The phone showed 7 in the morning and not a single message or missed call. At this time on Sundays, Olivia would usually be jumping on my bed by now, demanding pancakes for breakfast. Abigail would be sitting with a book in a chair by the window, patiently waiting for her sister to wake Daddy. Ethan, of course, would still be asleep. Adolescence was taking its toll. I got up, feeling every muscle, and wandered into the house. There were signs of a hurried departure everywhere. An abandoned doll on the living room couch, an unfinished glass of milk on the kitchen table, Ethan's forgotten school bag by the front door. The usually meticulous Meredith hadn't even put the dishes in the dishwasher this time. The plates of breakfast leftovers were still in the sink. He turned on the coffee maker and pulled out a mug, the one with "To the Best Daddy" on it, the one the kids had given him last Christmas. Meredith had said it was tasteless, but I loved drinking coffee out of it. The mailbox revealed a letter from the twins' school, a reminder of next week's parent-teacher conference. Attendance by both parents is required, the underlined line read. I wondered how Meredith would explain my absence. My phone vibrated a message from Vince. Come by the bar, need to talk. It's important. I hesitated. Sunday, 10 a.m. wasn't a good time to visit a bar, but something in the tone of the message made me wary. The bar was 15 minutes away. It was usually still closed at this time, but Vince was waiting out front, nervously smoking a cigarette, a habit his wife had tried unsuccessfully to break for the past 10 years. The inside smelled of last night's beer and cleaning supplies. The cleaning lady, an elderly Mexican woman named Maria, was wiping down the counter, humming something to herself. Meredith came in yesterday. Vince walked behind the counter, pulling out 2 cups of coffee. After she took the kids, I felt my stomach clench. I demanded surveillance tapes, said something about collecting evidence of your drinking. You didn't give... What do you take me for? He snorted. Of course I didn't. Said the cameras haven't worked in a month. But Garrett, she won't stop there. He was right. Meredith had never been good at losing. She's already been halfway across town. Vince continued. Been to Jimmy's shop, asking about your stints. Stopped by Reed's wife Sarah's place, trying to convince her that you're a bad influence on her husband. Jesus. I rubbed my face with my hands. She's completely out of her mind. That's not all. She wrote a letter to the school board. Claims you've been coming to parent-teacher conferences drunk. What? Calm down. Vince put a hand on my shoulder. You've got us. I already talked to Principal Patterson, explained the situation. He's known you for years, saw you helping with the school bus repairs. I nodded, feeling infinitely grateful. Reputations are everything in a small town, and Meredith was methodically trying to destroy mine. Have you heard from the kids? Nothing since yesterday. Phones are disconnected, no response to messages. Vince shook his head. That's not right, buddy. Using kids as weapons? It's just wrong. Maria had finished cleaning up and was now looking at us with obvious sympathy. She had worked here for 15 years and knew all the regulars at the bar. Senor Garrett, she approached the bar. I saw your wife outside the supermarket yesterday. She was saying such horrible things about you to Mrs. Foster, but we all know what you're really like. Thank you, Maria. She smiled and went back to work, and I sat staring into my cooling coffee and thinking about how quickly the life you've spent years building can crumble. The ringing of the phone made me flinch. An unfamiliar number. Mr. Holbrook? This is Amanda Pierce, Abigail and Olivia's teacher. Yes? I straightened up, my heart beating faster. I'm sorry for calling on a Sunday, but I thought you should know. Mrs. Holbrook sent a letter that the girls will no longer be attending school, that you're moving to another town. Vince was saying something, but I couldn't hear him over the noise in my ears. That's not true. My voice sounded hoarse. We're not moving anywhere. She took the kids without my consent. A pause on the other end of the line. That's what I thought, Miss Pierce finally said. You know, your girls are special. Abigail wrote such a touching essay last week about her father, about how you taught her how to fix her bike, how you read books with her before bed. I clutched the phone tighter, feeling tears come to my throat. Thanks for letting me know. Hang in there, Mr. Holbrook, and know that at school, we're on your side. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. Vince didn't try to speak, just moved his coffee cup closer and sat down next to me. She's trying to erase me from their lives, I finally said. First the reputation, now the school. What's next? Hey, Vince turned to me. Remember when you helped me with the bar? When the IRS tried to shut me down and no one believed I'd pull through? You didn't give up then. Don't give up now. I nodded, remembering those times. Reed and I had spent weeks poring over documents, looking for loopholes in the law. Meredith was angry that I was disappearing in the evenings to help a friend, but I couldn't leave Vince in the lurch. Speaking of Reed, Vince glanced at his watch. He said to tell you he's expecting you in the office by 2. Something about some urgent paperwork. On Sunday? He doesn't have a day off for friends. You know old Reed. I finished my coffee and got up. I still had to stop by the house, take a shower, change my clothes. The thought of an empty house made everything inside clench, but I couldn't hide in the garage or the bar forever. Thanks, Vince, for everything. You're welcome, buddy. And hey, they'll be back. The kids love you. No lie will change that. On the way home, I stopped at the supermarket. I needed to buy something for lunch, though I had no appetite at all. The store was unusually quiet, Sunday morning, most of the townspeople in church. In the cereal aisle, I bumped into Mrs. Blackwood, the same mistress with Corvette. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled and her eyes read anxiety. Garrett, I was just about to call you, she lowered her voice. Your wife, she came to see me yesterday, said some terrible things. I told her she was out of her mind, to accuse me, a woman of age, of having an affair with a mechanic who is old enough to be my son. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Blackwood. No, dear, it is I who am sorry. I've heard about the children. It's wrong, completely wrong. I nodded, not trusting my voice. You know what? She rummaged through her purse and pulled out a business card. My sister is a marriage counselor, a very good specialist. Give her a call. She can help you put together the right strategy for court. I took the card, feeling my throat constrict from unshed tears. So many people on my side ready to help, to support, and I can't even hug my own kids, tell them everything is going to be okay. At home, the first thing I did was go up to the children's rooms. I made the beds. Meredith always scolded me for doing it wrong, for not turning the corners as tightly. Picked up scattered toys, put away textbooks. In Ethan's room, I found his practice diary. He'd written down every game, every successful shot. The last entry was from Friday. Dad promised to come to the next game. I hope I don't let him down. The phone rang again. This time Reed. Don't be late for your meeting, he said without preamble. And Garrett, grab all the documents you can find, especially medical certificates for treatment for alcoholism. Do you think it'll come to that? I think we need to be prepared for anything. She declared war, remember? I remembered. I sure did. I put the papers in a folder, checked my phone, still no messages from the kids. As I left the house, I cast one last glance at the family photo in the hallway. We were supposed to be happy. We had everything we needed to be happy. Now all that was left was the fight, and I wasn't about to lose it. Reed's office greeted me with the familiar smell of leather and coffee. A light rain was drizzling outside the window, turning the Sunday afternoon into a blurry gray blur. A cup of freshly brewed espresso smoked on my friend's desk, an impressive stack of papers lying beside it. I've got news. Reed took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes tiredly. And they're not very good. I sank into the chair, feeling my fingers go numb. I'd almost gotten used to bad news in the last 24 hours, but each time it hit harder. Meredith has filed a countersuit, claims full custody of the kids. On what grounds? This is where it gets interesting. He pulled a document from the folder. She has a medical report from one Dr. Stevens. According to it, you show signs of alcohol dependency and aggressive behavior. What the hell? I've never been to that doctor. Exactly. We can challenge that conclusion, but the process will take time. In the meantime, he faltered. What? In the meantime, the court can restrict your visits with the kids until the circumstances are clarified. The air was suddenly catastrophically short. Breathe. Reed motioned me a glass of water. We'll get through this. We've got our trumps. At that moment, my phone rang. The number was unidentifiable, but I knew immediately who it was. Dad? Wilfred? I straightened in my chair. Meredith's dad never just called me. Listen, son. His usually confident voice sounded worried. I just came from them. The situation, it's worse than I thought. Have you seen the kids? How are they? Ethan's hanging in there, trying to be strong. The twins, they're scared, Garrett. Meredith is telling them things. What things? A pause. I could hear Wilfred lighting a cigarette on the other end of the wire, a habit he couldn't get rid of even after his heart attack. She told them you don't love them anymore, that you had another family, that's why you stayed late at work so often. I closed my eyes, feeling the tears coming up. Abigail's been crying all morning. Olivia refuses to eat. And Ethan, he smashed his phone when Meredith tried to show him some pictures supposedly proving you cheated. Jesus, I pinched the bridge of my nose with my fingers. Wilfred, you know that's not true. All these years I've been… I know. He interrupted me. That's why I'm calling. I don't recognize my daughter, Garrett. This isn't the girl my wife and I raised. You could hear the pain in his voice. The pain of a father seeing his child turn into a monster. What do I do? Come, now. Meredith's gone to see her lawyer. The kids are with me. I looked at Reed. He nodded, already gathering his papers into his briefcase. On my way. Wilfred's house was in the old part of town, a Victorian mansion he'd refused to sell despite all the entreaties of the realtors. This was where Meredith's childhood had been. This was where we'd celebrated our engagement, here. The front door opened before I could knock. Ethan stood there, my boy, so mature in the 2 days since I'd been here. His eyes read a mixture of relief and wariness. Daddy. He stepped forward, and I raked him into a hug, feeling his shoulders shake. I'm here, son, I'm here. The stomping of little feet was heard from the back of the house, and in a moment the twins were already hanging on top of me, wrapped around both sides. They were crying, both of them, tucked into my rain-soaked jacket. Girls, shh. I knelt down, hugging them. It's okay. I'm not leaving you guys, ever. Really? Abigail lifted a crying face. Mommy said, Mom's really upset right now. I tried to speak calmly. And she's saying things that aren't always true. She showed some pictures. Ethan clenched his fists. Said you had another family. But that's a lie, right? I knew it was a lie. Of course it's a lie. I pulled him closer. I only have one family, you. Wilfred watched us from the living room doorway. There was more silver in his gray hair, the wrinkles deeper. He looked about 10 years older. Children, come into the kitchen, he said softly. Grandma baked your favorite cinnamon rolls. When we were alone, he sank heavily into an old leather chair, the same one in which he'd once read bedtime stories to little Meredith. I should have noticed sooner, he shook his head. All those years, her control over you, over the kids, the way she manipulated all of us. It's not your fault. No, it's mine. My mother and I always indulged her. Maybe if back then, when we were kids. He didn't finish the sentence. The house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, a familiar, cozy smell from Meredith's childhood. I wondered if she remembered those times, when she was just a happy girl, not a woman obsessed with control. What now? Wilfred asked. Now there's going to be a trial. I pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes out of my pocket. I hadn't smoked in 3 years, but now, she's filed for full custody. I'll testify. He said it quietly but firmly. I'll tell everything. About how she manipulates the kids, how she tries to turn them against you. Wilfred, she's your daughter. That's exactly why I have to do this. Because I love her. Because she's the kind of person who will ruin not only your life, but her own, and the children's lives. From the kitchen came the laughter of the twins, for the first time in days. Grandma was probably telling them one of her stories. She always knew how to cheer the kids up. You know, Wilfred rose, walking over to the old secretary. I found this yesterday when I was looking through old photo albums. He pulled out a tattered, leather-bound notebook. Meredith's diary. She was 16. I took the notebook, opened it at random. Meredith's handwriting, so familiar, but very different. A lighter, looser handwriting. Today, my dad told me that I can be anything I want to be, I read aloud. That the most important thing is to be happy. I wonder if I'll ever be able to make my kids as happy as he makes me. Wilfred turned away to the window, but I could see his shoulders shaking. Where is that girl, Garrett? Where did she disappear to? I didn't know the answer. Maybe she disappeared gradually, day by day, dissolving into fears and complexes. Maybe she was consumed by a lust for control, a desire for a perfect life that didn't exist. Dad! Olivia appeared in the doorway. Grandma wants to know if you're staying for lunch? I looked at Wilfred. He nodded. Of course, Princess. How can I miss Grandma's famous pie? She brightened and ran back into the kitchen. A moment later, the clinking of dishes came from there. The children were helping set the table, as they did at home every Sunday. Stay the night, Wilfred said. The couch in the study is quite comfortable, and the children need time with you. And Meredith? I'll deal with my daughter. He squeezed my shoulder. It's time someone told her no. We sat around the large dining room table, the same table where we'd once celebrated our engagement. The kids talked about school, about friends, about their dreams. For the first time in a long time, they spoke freely, not looking back fearfully at the door, not picking out every word. Abigail showed me her new drawing of her family, all together, holding hands. Olivia told me about the upcoming school play where she'd been given the lead role. Ethan hesitantly asked if I was coming to his next play. I'll definitely come, I looked him in the eye. I promise. Even if Mom is against it? Even if the whole world is against it? He smiled, for the first time in days. In the evening, when the kids were already asleep upstairs, Wilfred and I sat in his office. The rain was falling outside the window, and the logs were crackling in the fireplace. There was a stack of photos on the table. Meredith's life story, from happy girl to what she was now. I remembered how she'd forbidden me to hold my son in my arms for the first few weeks after the birth. checking the temperature of the bathwater 10 times. How she cried if things didn't go according to her plan. She needs help, Garrett. Wilfred finished his whiskey. Professional help. But first we need to protect the children. The trial was scheduled for 10 in the morning, but I arrived early. After a sleepless night, my nerves were taut as strings. The courthouse towered over the city like a gray hulk, its columns drowning in the morning mist. People were already gathering on the steps. I recognized a few parents from the twins' school. Vince, who was smoking nervously under an umbrella. Even Mrs. Blackwood had come, despite the rain and the early hour. Cheerleaders. Reed squeezed my shoulder. See, you're not alone. The courthouse lobby smelled of wood polish and damp umbrellas. Sarah's heels tapped on the marble floor like a metronome, counting down the minutes until the hearing began. She refused to leave despite her condition. I have to be here, for the children's sake. Meredith showed up at 9:30 sharp, accompanied by her attorney, a burly man in a suit that probably cost as much as a used car. She looked impeccable in a severe gray dress, her hair styled hair to hair. Only her eyes betrayed her condition red, inflamed from lack of sleep or tears. Judge Henderson was a middle-aged woman, with a penetrating gaze and the tired face of someone who had seen too much family drama. She started the hearing at precisely 10 o'clock without even glancing at her watch. Divorce and minor child custody case. Her voice sounded smooth and professional. Mrs. Holbrook is seeking full custody, citing her spouse's erratic behavior and his alcohol addiction. Mr. Holbrook disputes these allegations and requests joint custody. Is that correct? The next 2 hours turned into a kaleidoscope of testimony. Teachers from the school told me what an attentive father I'd been, how I'd helped with holiday parties, repaired the school bus. Vince described our rare meetings at the bar. He didn't even finish his beer. He was always in a hurry to get home to the kids. Mrs. Blackwood indignantly denied rumors of an affair. I looked at Meredith. She sat up straight, clutching a leather folder in her hands. Her face grew more tense with each new witness. And then Reed spoke the words that changed everything. Calling the next witness, Mr. Wilfred Donovan. A whisper swept through the hall. Meredith turned sharply toward her father, who was slowly rising from his seat. Her eyes read consternation, for the first time in the entire meeting. Dad, her voice trembled. Don't. Wilfred didn't look at her. He strode to the witness stand, leaning on his cane. The arthritis was bothering him again in this weather. Mr. Donovan, Reed approached him. Tell the court about your observations of your daughter's family in recent years. Wilfred took a deep breath. There was such silence in the hall that you could hear the rain drumming against the windows. I love my daughter, he began quietly. But what she's doing right now, it's not right. I've seen how she manipulates the children, how she tries to turn them against their father, how she forbids them to communicate with him, threatens them with punishment if they show affection for him. Liar! Meredith jumped up. You betrayed me, my own daughter. Mrs. Holbrook, the judge's voice sounded like the blow of a gavel. Sit down, or you will have to leave the room. She slumped in her seat, but I could see her hands trembling. Last week, Wilfred continued in a firm voice, my daughter showed the kids fake pictures, supposedly proving their father's infidelity. Ethan was so upset he smashed his cell phone. The twins cried all night. These are not the actions of a loving mother. I clenched my fists, feeling my nails dig into my palms. The children's faces were in front of me, scared, confused, not understanding why their mother was trying to destroy their faith in their father. Objection! Meredith's attorney jumped in. The witness is clearly biased. Overruled. The judge shook her head. Continue, Mr. Donovan. Garrett never missed an important event in the children's lives without a good reason. Wilfred spoke more confidently now. Always made time to help with lessons, to play, just to talk. As for the accusations of alcoholism, that's a lie. I personally witnessed him give up alcohol 3 years ago. He hasn't touched alcohol since then, not even at family gatherings. Meredith whispered something vehemently to her lawyer, but he only shook his head. Her perfectly styled hair was beginning to muss, and red blotches appeared on her cheeks. Mr. Donovan, Reed continued calmly, How can you comment on your daughter's statement that Mr. Holbrook is a threat to the children? That's absurd. Wilfred shook his head. The only threat to the children is their mother's behavior. Her manipulations, her lies, her attempts to use them as weapons in a personal vendetta. I've seen her change over the last few years, how her desire for control has turned into an obsession, but never thought she'd go this far. Daddy, please. Meredith's voice sounded almost pleading. I'm sorry, dear. Wilfred finally looked at his daughter. But you have to stop. For your own sake. For the sake of the children. A heavy silence hung in the hall. I could see the judge making notes in his papers, the jurors looking over at each other, Sarah furtively wiping away tears. Does the defense have any questions for the witness? The judge asked. Meredith's attorney stood up, but she tugged on his sleeve, shaking her head. He sat back down. After a break, the parade of defense witnesses began. Some neighbors who claimed to have seen me drunk. A school nurse who noticed bruises on the twins, which turned out to be baseball marks. Each accusation fell apart under Reed's cross-examination. And then something happened that no one expected. An elderly woman in a white coat entered the courtroom. Your Honor, Reed rose, calling Dr. Elizabeth Stevens. A whisper rippled through the rows. It was the name of the very doctor whose alcoholism report Meredith had provided. Dr. Stevens, Reed stepped up to the witness stand. Can you authenticate this document? The woman put on her glasses, scrutinized the paper. No, she shook her head. This is not my handwriting or my signature. Furthermore, I never met Mr. Holbrook as a patient. Meredith turned pale. Her attorney was writing something rapidly in a notebook. Your Honor, Reed's voice sounded almost solemn. I ask that the claim of falsification of medical records be admitted into evidence. The next hour passed like a blur. I heard voices, saw movement in the courtroom, but everything seemed unreal. Only when the judge announced a recess until tomorrow to make a decision, I felt myself returning to reality. The courtroom hallway was quiet. Wilfred stood at the window looking out at the rain. I walked over to him. Thank you, I said quietly. You don't have to. He shook his head. I didn't do it just for you, it's for her too. Maybe now she'll understand. Meredith walked past us without looking. Her shoulders were slumped, no trace of her morning flawlessness left. She'll understand. I put my hand on my father-in-law's shoulder. Someday. The phone in my pocket vibrated, a message from Ethan. Dad, the girls and I are praying for you. Mom doesn't know I have a phone from Grandma. I love you. I showed the message to Wilfred. He smiled through his tears. See? They know the truth. No matter what, they know. The second day of the meeting started differently. Maybe it was the sun breaking through the clouds for the first time in a week, or the way Reed held himself with confidence, or the message from Ethan that came early in the morning. We believe in you, Dad. The courtroom was unaccustomedly quiet. Meredith sat alone. Her lawyer was late, which was quite unlike his usual punctuality. She looked different from yesterday. No perfect styling, minimal makeup, a simple black dress instead of a business suit. I caught myself thinking that she resembled the girl I had once fallen in love with. Vulnerable, real. All rise. Court is in session. The bailiff's voice brought me back to reality. Judge Henderson entered the courtroom carrying a file folder. Her face was expressionless, but something in her movements, in the way she adjusted her glasses, told me the decision had already been made. Please be seated. She opened the folder. After reviewing all of the evidence presented and hearing the witnesses, the court is ready to rule on the custody of the minor children in the Holbrook v. Holbrook divorce case. I felt Sarah, sitting behind me, squeeze my shoulder. Reed straightened up, ready for any turn of events. The allegations of Mr. Holbrook's alcohol addiction were found to be untenable. Moreover, the attempt to provide forged medical documents casts a serious shadow on the credibility of Mrs. Holbrook's other claims. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Meredith lower her head. The testimony, including that of Mrs. Holbrook's father, paints a picture of manipulative behavior that cannot be considered to be in the best interests of the children. Using the children as a tool to pressure a spouse is a form of emotional abuse. There was such silence in the room that you could hear the wall clock ticking. However, the judge paused. The court also takes into consideration that Mrs. Holbrook has been the primary caretaker of the children throughout the marriage and, despite the current circumstances, has shown concern for their well-being. I held my breath. Reed stepped forward a little. Considering all the circumstances, the court orders divorce granted due to irreconcilable differences. In the matter of custody of the minor children, Ethan Holbrook, age 13, and Abigail and Olivia Holbrook, age 8, the court orders joint custody. I exhaled, feeling tears of relief flow down my cheeks. Sarah sobbed quietly behind me. The children will spend an equal amount of time with each parent, on a week-to-week pattern. Holidays and vacations are to be shared equally. Both parents are required to participate in important decisions regarding the children's education and health. I looked at Meredith. She was sitting still, but her shoulders relaxed a little. She was probably afraid of losing the kids completely too. In addition, the judge continued, the court orders both parents to undergo family therapy to learn how to interact constructively for the good of the children. Mrs. Holbrook is also ordered to see an individual psychologist to work on controlling behavior. At that moment, the hall doors opened. I turned around and saw Wilfred and the children. They stood in the doorway holding hands. Ethan, so grown up in his school uniform, the twins in matching blue dresses. The judge noticed them and smiled slightly. I think the most important decision can already be communicated directly to the people involved. The children may enter. They walked unhesitatingly into the hall. I saw Ethan clutch his sister's hands tighter, Abigail clinging to her brother, Olivia shifting her gaze from me to Meredith. Dad? Ethan's voice shook. I stood up, opened my arms, and in a moment they were there, all three of them, alive, warm, mine. Abigail was crying, tucked into my shirt. Olivia had her arms around my neck, and Ethan just stayed close, but I could feel his shoulders shaking. It's okay. I stroked their heads, kissing their cheeks wet with tears. It's going to be okay. Can we stay with you? Olivia whispered. And with Mom, too. I caught Meredith's gaze across the hall. You won't lose any of us. Meredith approached us slowly. She looked confused, broken, but there was something new in her eyes. Maybe understanding, maybe acceptance. Children. Her voice was quiet. Forgive me. For everything. I'm sorry. The twins looked at her warily, but Ethan stepped forward and hugged his mother. After a moment, his sisters joined him. Court is adjourned. Judge Henderson banged her gavel, but hardly anyone heard it. Meredith's car was waiting in the parking lot. She was to pick up the children for the first week of the court-ordered visitation. I could see the fear in the twins' eyes, Ethan's uncertainty. Hey, I crouched down in front of them. Remember what I told you guys? No matter what happens, no matter how things turn out, I'll always be your daddy. I'll always love you. And I'll see you in a week? Olivia sniffed her nose. Of course. And I'll come to your play, Ollie. And to your play, Ethan. And I'll read to you before bed, Abby. I promise. They hugged me one last time and walked to the car. Meredith lingered for a moment. Garrett, she stammered. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know, I replied. Me too. She nodded and walked to the car. The kids waved at me through the back window until the car disappeared around the corner. Let's go home, Reed said. Sarah's going to make her specialty pie. Home, I repeated, tasting the word on my palate. It would be a different home now, a different life.